Welcome to the Woman's Current. Is the Tide Turning? I'm Sylvia Beckerman.
And I'm Molly Wadzik. Together we're exploring how women support women across generations, experiences, and perspectives.
From baby boomers to millennials and beyond, we're asking, are we lifting each other up? And how do we keep the tide moving forward?
Each week, we'll dive into real conversations with women who are reshaping the currents and reflect on what those stories mean for all of us.
So let's dive in. Let's get started.
Our aim through our practice was to give the women who came to us as much power as we could over this experience and to make them feel as comfortable and supported as possible in their decision. When we asked women, were they sure? I mean, here they were navigating this underground system and going to put their lives in the hands of total strangers who didn't have medical degrees. They would almost laugh at us. Am I sure? I've been looking for you guys forever.
Welcome to the Woman's Current. Is the Tide Turning? I'm Sylvia Beckerman, joined by my millennial co-host, Molly Wadzik. Today's conversation takes us back to a moment when women quite literally saved each other's lives. Our guest, who I am so glad to have here today, I've talked to her before, is Laura Kaplan. Laura is a founding member of the Janes, the underground abortion network that helped women before Roe v. Wade. She's also the author of The Story of Jane, the legendary underground feminist abortion service. We'll look at how women organized then, how they supported one another at great personal risk, and ask whether that same courage and community could or would happen today. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today and having this conversation.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I just have to correct you. I was not a founding member of Jane.
Right. You came in a couple of years after.
Right. I joined in the fall of 71, and the group started in 1969.
I do remember my brain sometimes, but thank you for correcting. And 1969, you came in the early 70s. Roe v. Wade wasn't until 72. So as far as I'm concerned, you're one of the heroes of this whole movement in with them. What I want to start off asking, can you take us back to that moment? What was the spark that led ordinary women to become the Janes, even though you weren't one of the original founders?
I think the spark was really the beginnings of the women's movement, the women's liberation movement in the late 60s. This was when women started talking to each other about what they personally could do to change women's lives, on a variety of issues, including equal pay, childcare, all kinds of things. So this particular group of women got together because they were interested in abortion. You probably heard me say this before this time. I think most of us thought, abortion was rare. And when women sought out illegal abortions, they wound up dead. And we'd seen the pictures of the crumpled bodies in the alleyways. When women started talking to each other in consciousness-raising groups to really, this is throwback to long, long ago, what they discovered was, first of all, lots of women looked for abortions, and lots of women found them, and in fact, were still alive afterwards. They might have not had a pleasant experience, but they were alive. And so groups of women all across the country started meeting to suss out the underground system in their particular area, neighborhood, city, whatever, and find reliable, competent practitioners, and then raise money, because illegal abortions were extremely expensive, to help women pay for those illegal abortions. And then, in our case, and that's how we started, with a woman named Heather Booth, who's a pretty famous person at this point, who got a couple of requests from people she knew looking for illegal abortions. And as she says, she never thought about abortion. I mean, it was completely out of her realm of experience. But she had been in Mississippi summer, and she had a lot of contacts in the civil rights movement. And she first found a Black doctor on the south side of Chicago, T.R. Howard, who was regularly performing abortions at his south side clinic. And so she referred the first two women to him and went from there. And then she sort of became known as the person you got in contact with if you needed an abortion. And so her practice evolved, and she knew nothing about abortion. There was no information. I always talk about this. We're used to going into bookstores now, and there's shelves of books on women's health. Well, back then, in the 60s, in the mid-60s, there was nothing. There were no women's health books. Our Bodies Ourselves, which was really the first, didn't come out until late 1970. So Heather had to figure out what to say to women from talking to the women she'd sent. So she developed a practice based on women's experience, the women she knew, so that she could describe what an abortion was and what it would feel like, etc. And at some point in 68, late 68, she felt like it was all getting too much for her. And frankly, she wanted to do other kinds of organizing work. And she had been sort of the rep of the nascent women's liberation movement. So, back in those days, there were all these sort of New Left conferences, and they would have one workshop on women's issues, and Heather would be there, and she would pass around yellow legal pads, each headed with a different kind of topic, like childcare, equal pay. Abortion was always one of them. And so at some point she took her lists of people who'd signed up and for abortion, and she called a meeting, and she explained what she had been doing. And then she began to train these women, not only in what she had learned over those few years, but also in what she had come to understand as the politics of abortion. She definitely wanted this group to have a political cast. And at some point when she felt they were ready, and, one of the main people in our group, Jody Howard, who was then Jody Parsons, told me, she kept thinking, okay, just give us the list of names and we're ready to go. But Heather made them write a little pamphlet, and I have it, but it's in my files. I didn't take it out because I wasn't expecting to do the whole sort of history. And Jody said to me it was like our final exam. And after that was written, then Heather turned over her contacts, because Dr. Howard occasionally would have to sort of go dark because of legal pressures. And so she found some other people that she could refer to as well. So she had a list. She handed that off to the people who stuck around to form the initial Jane group. And those people, I can give you their names, in fact. Most of them are deceased now. It was Jody, Ruth Sergel, Eleanor Oliver, who's still with us, Susie Schwerin, who then became Susan Stone, who's no longer with us. And that was the original group. And so they went from there. They divided up the tasks. Jody and Ruth were the doctor contacts. That turned out to be the most critical and powerful position. Susan raised money. That was her main task. And Eleanor handled the contact with women, and how to do that, stuff like that. So like I said, there were groups like this coming out of the nascent women's liberation movement all over the country. But Jane, which was our code name, it was a name we invented because nobody was named Jane. And it was a way to call women back and leave a message without giving anything away. We could just say, tell her if the woman wasn't there, tell her Jane called. Yeah. This is before cell phones. This is before answering machines. There was no technology. We're so used to living in a technological world that I think we forget. It wasn't that long ago. There was none of this stuff.
And that's it. It wasn't that long ago. Molly, jump in here because we're talking about something where it just started as a little kernel and women got together. They weren't baby boomer, oh, they're baby boomers now, but
we were baby boomers then too.
Yes. Oh, well, Molly, jump right in.
Yeah, it is, here we are post the overturning of Roe, but in many ways, we're not right back where we started, right? I think about how my generation's access and activism looks like now, as someone who's had an abortion myself, I know how isolating it can feel still, even and not scary for myself. My abortion story is fine. I had no negative effects. It was the right decision for me. I didn't struggle with my decision like a lot of women do, but I had resources. I had online support. I have community knowledge that you guys didn't have, but it still felt risky in its own way because it is in our political climate. And I'm just looking back, I'm wondering what kept you going emotionally when the stakes were so high? Because I know now with all of the resources we have with like the National Network of Abortion Funding, with online strategizing, with encrypted services like Signal where we can communicate safely, this whole notion of where the negative connotation of gossip associated with women coming from networks like yours, where women are sharing information for our own liberation and empowerment. I would just love to hear the perspective of like, now that we're post Roe, what does it feel like for you seeing this next iteration of the same kind of work with the resources we have now?
It's great. I mean, Sylvia said something about whether women, blah, 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 these days will be doing stuff. They are. I mean, it's already happening. We don't talk about it publicly because there are risks involved, and
Exactly.
you don't talk about these things publicly. I mean, if you want to go get arrested, do something else, is what I say. If you want your name in the newspaper, do something else. This is not about that. This is really about making a difference. I'm telling you the long version of the story, sort of, because I want everyone to understand that you don't come. It wasn't like we said, oh, let's learn how to do abortions and then we can. And nobody thought like that. Nobody at all in this group ever in their lives expected to do what we did. But you always start with what you can do right here and now. And the technology around abortion has made that more possible and easier. I mean, we were doing surgery, which is dangerous. There's no two ways around it. I mean, we were young, so we were stupid. No offense, Molly.
Not
But we
that
were,
young.
yeah. I didn't think you were that young, but we were all in our 20s.
Yeah.
I was 24 when I joined the group. The youngest person in the group was 19. Jody was in her 20s. I think Ruth was in her late 20s. All of us were in our 20s, so we were pretty young, and that makes you more incautious. Let me use that word. And if that is a word, I don't even know if it is. And also because of the times we were living in. This was the heyday of the anti-war movement, the student movement, the civil rights movement. We really thought we were creating a new society. The people who thought the revolution was just around the corner. I did not, even in my 20s, think that. But so there was a river of activism. And so all you had to do is put your toe in. I think it's a little harder now because there isn't that same groundswell. There is a groundswell, and there's lots of people doing wonderful, wonderful work on a variety of issues and taking risks, especially in this current administration, where just saying what you believe could get you deported, But and maybe it's because we were in the midst of it and it seemed like everybody, but so taking those risks, people were, buildings were being bombed. People were running guns. I mean, it didn't seem like what we were doing was that dangerous. And we were young, so we didn't think, we knew full well that what we were doing could get us in a whole heap of trouble and that what we were doing could jeopardize the lives of the women who came to us. I mean, we weren't naive in that way. But I think there was this sense of, I think Eleanor once said to me, we sort of believed that if we did this right and we did it well, we would skate, we would be like the saviors of the city of Chicago because it was such a well-known secret. The cops definitely knew about us. The medical profession knew about us. Doctors were referring to us. And we had a system later on when I was a member where if we got a bunch, because we asked women who called us how they heard about us. And when a doctor's name kept coming up, one of us would call that doctor and say, "This is Jane." Of course, we weren't, none of us were Jane, but "This is Jane, and we've noted that you're sending a number of your patients to us, and we'd like to ask you what you could do for us." And mostly the response was, "Don't ever call me again." But occasionally, a doctor would say, "Yeah, how can I help you?" And we did have a medical backup in the form of some doctors who would admit people to hospitals for us and gave us sort of other kinds of training that we needed, and would be sounding boards if a problem arose. How do you deal with excessive bleeding during a DNC, for instance? A lot of this we learned from the practitioners that we initially worked with, the doctors and the, in quote, doctors who we worked with, because they knew how to handle a lot of things.
Well, one of the things that, well, surprise isn't the right word, that is most amazing is there was no judgment. One of the things I remember is you didn't ask women why they wanted an abortion. You asked them if they were sure. And that was key, not why, because there are so many different reasons why people want. And the theory that women make snap judgments is so beyond absurd and degrading to women to begin with. As Molly told us, her story. I had a story back in the early 70s, and, back then it had just New York was fine. Planned Parenthood was fine. There wasn't what you were doing, and the fact that there was no judgment, and women from all over, from a variety of different backgrounds, were able to get together and make this commitment, knowing what the personal risk could be to themselves because what they were doing was illegal.
Right. But, let's not deny the fact that it was a real, I'm trying to think of the right adjective here. It was exciting. It was,
Well, you were young.
we were young, but it was also so rewarding. One of the women who was in Jane said to me, we had a home run every time we were up at bat. And you don't get that experience a lot in life, where it's always yes. The reaction of the women who came to us, and here they're coming to in a legal situation with women who could be very, very different from them by class, by race, we were kind of hippies, blue jeans and t-shirts. I'm wearing blue jeans and t-shirts, right?
It's what I love.
I haven't changed my look in 50 years or more. And we were doing abortions in our apartments and our friends' apartments, beds. There were no stirrups. It was aim. Through our practice was to give the women who came to us as much power as we could over this experience and to make them feel as comfortable and supported as possible in their decision, whether it was a difficult decision or like Molly, you know what you have to do. And there's no two ways. When we asked women, were they sure? I mean, here they were navigating this underground system and going to put their lives in the hands of total strangers who didn't have medical degrees. They would almost laugh at us. Am I sure? I've been looking for you guys.
I think, Laura, a lot about the risk that you talk about, right? People forget in this climate now post-Roe just how dangerous pregnancy is in and of itself, right? So the risks that the women were taking then, when you talk about it being exciting, because you were part of handing women back their autonomy. Like you were helping gift women with their futures, for the children they already have, for the desires and hopes and direction they have for their own life.
Exactly.
Being able to gift women that autonomy, I can't imagine how powerful that was. The risk looks different, right? So like maybe we aren't performing abortions on our friends anymore, which is great news. But even through access and digital platforms, I don't track my period on an app anymore. Some of these states have laws where they can access when you're menstruating, and it can be used against you to try to make a claim that you had an illegal abortion. So I just find that interesting that now we're post-Roe and the risks just look different.
Right.
I think if the Janes were operating today, yeah, I mean, there's still a network of Janes here. We just don't call ourselves that anymore. We're legacy Janes, and the risk just looks different. So
right. And you brought up something that I did want to mention. When we started doing what we did, and then we evolved to the point where we learned how to do the abortions ourselves and set up this whole underground abortion service. And it was all women, and none of us were medical professionals, and all yada, 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 all of that, which people can read my book and then they'll learn all the details. We sort of thought that we had sort of arrived out of nothing, ex nihilo, sprung from Zeus's head, fully formed, and it was only after Jane folded, I think it was right after, that Barbara Ehrenreich and, all right, this is the problem with being old. You can't remember people's names, but it'll come into my brain at some point. Wrote a pamphlet called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, and it traces the history of women as healers and the oppression of women as healers. That we had a sense that we had a history. So part of telling the story of Jane for me and for us, because now many of us who are still alive are, talking publicly about this, is to give younger women a sense of what's possible. That you don't have to feel like you're inventing this out of nothing.
Yeah.
That you have this history. Jane is a part of that history, but we're just a part of it. That gives you the authority and the right to move forward and do what you can to benefit women, and to increase the power of women in the world and the decision making, validate the decision making of women in the world. I think that's really important to have a sense of history so you don't feel like we felt like, how the hell did we get here? How did this happen? That we have no antecedents. We didn't know we had antecedents. Deirdre English is the other author of, I knew the name would fly back in my brain. If you haven't seen that pamphlet, Molly, have you ever seen that
No,
pamphlet?
I
haven't
have
seen
not
that
seen the
pamphlet.
pamphlet. I would love to see the
You
pamphlet.
guys, if I should have pulled some of these things out of my files so I had it. It's just a pamphlet, but it talks about the history of midwives and witches, and witches were healers. It's just a fabulous little pamphlet. So look for it, witches, midwives, and nurses.
Sounds right up my alley. I have to say too, like, being of the generation, we now have the benefit of this written history, like your book. You guys were relying on oral history and story sharing. Now my generation has the benefit of having all this history written out and being able to say with complete confidence that abortion care is older than the government. It's older than religion. It has been time immemorial the way that women is just a normal part of life giving. It's a normal part of existing as a woman is being in control of your body. So I
Right,
think
right.
it's super important that people of my generation keep that in mind when we think about where we are now to not get so demoralized post-Roe in this new iteration of the fight for our autonomy. So I think it's a really good point when you talk about you were just working off of what people shared of their stories. You didn't have any foundation.
We didn't have any foundation, which was, it's very freeing also.
Sure.
It's like our practice was quite unusual, in terms of, well, we didn't use drapes. And I recently was seeing a physical therapist who does pelvic health because that's what old people have to go and do these days. And she was doing sort of a pelvic exam and put a drape on. And I said to her, "Why are you doing that?" And she said, "Well, it's for your own, for your privacy." I said,
Honestly.
"You got your fingers in me, girl. I'm not talking privacy here anymore. This is for you. This is so you're separating me into body parts. It's not for me. It's not for my modesty at all, because what we're doing is not very modest. This is medical training where you divide a human being into their body parts.
Yeah.
And
So
that
yeah.
that could be so detrimental because you're not taking the person as a whole.
Right. And especially when it comes to things like reproduction, which is about so much more than it's not, cutting out a cyst. We're talking about a person's whole view of their life and their decision making. So we focused really a lot on, education. During the abortion, this is what we're doing. I think I told you this story, Sylvia, when the Carol Downer and I don't remember the other woman who came, they did sort of a national tour with self-help. And I hear crying outside, so I have to open the
Go
door.
right
Give me a
ahead. It's part of life.
Did you see me have to remove my cat from
Yes,
behind me
I
a couple
did.
times?
Yes, I did. Again, it's
Going
part of
after the
life.
plant.
Now, I don't have to remove a dog or a cat because I don't have any anymore with
All right.
Laura. Okay, so we're back.
Oh, hi, buddy.
This is my Petey.
Hi,
Okay.
Petey. Loves abortion access, I can tell.
Yeah, well, he'd like to do some impregnating on his own, but he doesn't have the equipment. He doesn't know he doesn't have the equipment, so he attempts.
One of the
Anyway,
things that I want to ask, we talk about James, women showed up for one another emotionally, physically, you even mentioned politically. Do you think that kind of solidarity really exists today?
absolutely. I mean, Molly, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for my experience, solidarity now isn't just local. You guys were really limited by in your community. Now it's mutual aid networks, it's ride shares, it's travel cooperatives, it's peer-to-peer support. Women are helping each other with childcare, lodging, showing up emotionally. And it's really expanded to be more intersectional as our society has grown and developed to focus on abortion access for trans individuals, for queer people, disabled, immigrants, historically excluded communities, which I don't think would exist as much if we didn't have the ability to reach beyond our locality. Like these digital tools make such a huge difference. And I think one of the biggest things and some of the work that I've been able to do in some of the reporting is hearing how much the ride shares and the abortion funds have been one of the biggest ways to access that solidarity and support.
Right, right. And that's really how we started, And, you take a step. I really hate it when people say, oh, you were so brave, you were so courageous. We all of us who are in Jane really hate that because we don't see ourselves that way. Those are external terms. They're not how we view ourselves. One woman said to me, I never saw myself as a leader, somebody who would get out there, but you put one foot in front of the other, and there you are in the middle of it. It's not that you make this decision that I'm going to do something really radical. I'm going to do something really outside the box. I'm going to do something that's illegal. You just say, what can I do right now that will make a difference? And then you follow that. The vision in front of you is making a difference, is making somebody's life easier, better, more fulfilled. And it takes you places you never imagined, never expected, never thought you were capable of. I mean, I certainly didn't. The first abortion I saw, I was in my apartment. Somebody called me and they said, go over to Rana's apartment. We're working there today. It was around the corner. You need to give this information to Diane. So I said, sure. And I knock on the door, and Diane comes to the door, and she says, oh, have you ever seen an abortion? I'd been in the group maybe a couple months. I don't really remember. I said, no. She said, come on in. And she said to the woman who was on the bed, do you mind if somebody comes in and observes? And it was a young black woman, I'll never forget her. She said, no, fine, come on in. So there she is lying on the bed, and her legs are, her feet are on the bed, and her legs are spread, and there's blood, coming out of her. And I thought, I'm going to pass out. It was like wang, yang, 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 I thought, I got to get out of here because I'd never seen anything like this in my life. When do you see this? So I politely said, thank you very much. I really have to get going because I thought I was going to keel over right there. But, so once it's a surprise, and I wasn't expecting that I was going to watch an abortion. And then it becomes, it's just what your life is. This is what you do every day. And so it becomes more normal. And you're like, yeah, this is blood. No big deal. This is part of it. This is what it is. And it's powerful. It's really powerful. And I think it's powerful for anyone in any piece of this, because now with medical abortions, like I said, you don't have to be doing the surgery that we were doing. It's still incredibly powerful to give somebody the tools to affect the kind of change they want to make in their lives. And to be an instrument of that is just, and it makes you feel about yourself that you're a much more competent
Yes, and
person in the world. Yeah.
I love that you said you weren't heroes. You did what needed to be done. You supported one another. Um, Again, there was never any judgment. With that mindset, what can young people take away from what you've spoken about, from what the Janes did? Could they take away today in the atmosphere that we are involved in?
Well, like I said before, I think the important piece is that it's been done. You know, there's a historical precedent for moving outside the law in the defense of women, or in the defense of anyone, in the defense of immigrants, in the defense of people who are different or whose needs are different from what someone is saying. This is the societal norm, you know. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah. It's been
I
done, and
answered that.
it's been done, and it's been done under conditions that were much more dangerous. I mean, I think that's the biggest piece for me is talking to my peers doing this work is it looks a lot different, but we do have the benefit of the foundation. And Laura, I love what you said about the courage piece, right? Because it's just about ordinary people. It's just about ordinary women acting together to change life. And your history proves that we can do that.
Right, right. I think knowing that there's precedent really, really, I mean, our current Supreme Court doesn't really care about precedent, but
Sure.
we do. I think it really helps everyone. You want to be on that timeline, that historical timeline. You want to see that it stretches back, like you said, Molly, thousands of years, you know, that it just gives you the power of that history behind you makes it possible to move forward. You know you're on the right side of history, when you can alleviate the pain and suffering of another human being.
Exactly. And that's what you did, and that's what that's what we have to look back on. And that, to me, gives the movement and the women coming up today. It's not the history, and again, it's the word retrieval, but to be able to continue forward in the times that we're in now, where it's getting more and more precarious. And I think, again, a lot of those systems are starting to be put into place. And it takes great joy to know that there are women supporting other women, especially when it comes to taking care of our own bodies and not having somebody tell us what we can and cannot do.
Right. And it's not just the US.
No.
Yeah.
I've met people from very foreign countries who are doing basically the same things that we did. And and they're excited. They're always excited to meet us, and we're always excited to meet them because, yeah, that spirit continues. And also, I have to say, because those of us who were fortunate enough to be in formerly known as the Abortion Counseling Service of Women's Liberation, our lives were changed, how we saw ourselves and how we went forward in the world. really was changed by that experience. We were all I always say to my friend Alice, I know she doesn't feel this way, but thank God for your failed IUD, because that's how I found my way to Jane. Was she wound up pregnant from a failed IUD that was
Me too.
you too, inserted incorrectly. And then came, and I think I told you this, Sylvia, she was so excited by the experience that she just had an illegal abortion. We were still using the guise, so she was blindfolded. And she was almost literally bouncing off the walls of my apartment with ecstasy, for not because she wasn't pregnant, but because of this experience was so educational. She said to me at one point, now this is going to sound really weird, and I don't mean for it's a serious topic, but she said, it's like you bought a ticket for a movie. And you go in the theater, and instead of a movie, it's a whole amusement park. There's all this pieces. There's all this stuff going on. It's not just this little piece.
Yeah. I mean, abortion,
medical piece.
Abortion can be joyful for some people because they know that not being pregnant is the right thing for them. I mean, I think holding space, there's a book that I read and did an interview with a woman, and it's not even about age, guys. Sometimes the brain fog's just there, right?
Yeah.
It gets worse, let me tell you.
So I'll have to send it to you, Laura. But basically, the book was about just holding space for all those different experiences, like the spiritual experiences, the difficult ones. I think just women supporting women, we would talk about that, is the continuing to share the stories. I think of We Testify, the We Testify platform, where women from all over the country and all over the world get on this platform. They share it by video. They put their name and their faces. And the more we are able to share our stories and our different experiences with abortion care, I think that is one of the great benefits of how we've built on the Jane's Foundation.
Right. So We Testify is women telling their abortion stories.
Yeah. Yep.
You know where this comes from.
Tell me. I would love the history.
Yeah. So back when New York was debating whether to legalize abortion in 1970, a group of radical women who went to the hearings, because the committee that was put together was all men except for one woman who was a nun. So they came to protest, and they couldn't get in to the hearing room, but they started telling their abortion stories. And this was a group called Red Stockings, and they decided from that experience to hold the first Speak Out on Abortion in New York City. We did one in Chicago the year after, where, it's not virtual. It's because there was no virtual.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have people come together and get up and tell their abortion stories, and they're called abortion speakouts. And I know at Hampshire College, when the group now known as, God, Mia's going to kill me. I can't believe I'm blanking here. Collective Power for Reproductive Justice used to be known as the Civil Liberties and Public Policy Program of Hampshire College. That's how they started. They do this great abortion reproductive justice conference every spring. That's free at Hampshire.
Great.
That you should go to.
Yeah. I mean, free. I mean, that's the biggest, when we talk about abortion access and education, all those barriers, right? So being free, that's a pretty big thing.
And people come, it used to be when I first started going, because I was friends with the woman who was the director, Marlene Freed, and then I was friends with the next director, friends with Mia Sullivan. Anyway, so they were having abortion speakouts at this. So when I first started going, it was very small, and over the years, it's been going on for decades. It's gotten really enormous, and people come from all over the country, and it's a great conference. It's not all academics. There's a lot of activists there, and I've been to events where they're people from other countries who are doing similar stuff come and talk about what they're doing in their home country. So great. But so the Speak Out started with Red Stockings in New York. And then the next year we did one in Chicago, and we had our plants, people we knew were going to get up but the feeling takes over. So total strangers were getting up and telling their abortion stories. It's a really powerful thing to break what you probably experienced when you went and got your abortion, that sense of isolation, and this is just me, and I'm all alone in this. The speaking about it really breaks that sense of isolation. And also the famous, was it in one of the early, Sylvia, you probably know this, early issues of Ms., where a whole bunch of famous women signed this letter, I've had an abortion?
Yes.
Is that one of the early
Yep. Because
issues of
Ms.
Ms.?
came out in 72, so it was right around when abortion became legal. So, yes. And to your point, if we don't continue to tell stories and tell our experiences and be able to speak about them, not only will they get lost, but people who, as you said, people stood up and started talking because you just need one person to say, well, this happened to me. And then somebody else has the courage to go, well, this happened to me, or I know. And that's how we get together. That's how we get that support out there. That's how we continue to communicate with one another on a common ground, common issues. And that is so important. Laura, I thank you so much for doing this again. And I'm sure I'm going to ask you to do it another time because we just have to keep talking. We're at a point where we have to keep the history. No matter what anyone says, we have to keep the history. We can't let anyone take that away from us. And I think your book, The Story of Jane, the legendary underground feminist abortion service, is something to be read because it's an amazing time and an amazing story. The 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 leak about Roe v. Wade being overturned, like in your book, you didn't name anyone because it had been illegal. And I'll never forget.
Well, and people, when I was interviewing people, they were still working, so they didn't want, and some of them were working for the government.
But as soon as things came out, when the New York Times, I believe it was, did that article and named the women, a lot of the women who were involved, that's when I got in touch with you. And I am so glad I did. Again, Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Molly and I are going to stay on for a little bit longer. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
Oh, well, I can always think of something else to say because I don't have any problem with that. But no, I think this is good, Molly. It's been just delightful to meet you and hear from you today. So thanks.
Laura, thank you so much for your work. Women everywhere, especially my generation and under me, my kids growing up, were so benefit from the work you have done in documenting this history because we need that so we can pull the guidance and build upon that in the digital age that we are now. There are so many lessons in that work that we can build on, but it's also just incredibly important, like Sylvia was saying, to have that historical context. We can't do the focus on the work that we need to do now without that. So thank you for going through those memories and trying to excavate them so we have it.
Yeah, then I decided to write the book because I thought we're going to forget all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's an important piece of history that I wanted people to know about. And the truth is, I've been a community organizer primarily since those days. And I thought this was a great, sort of a fascinating story to use to to explore some lessons about community organizing. I wasn't thinking it was going to have the significance with the overturning of Roe that it has taken on, but I'm glad I did it, because now I know when I talk to people from those days, nobody remembers anything. So I mean, people didn't even, it was only 15 years or something after we folded, and people didn't remember. It was pulling teeth to get people to try to remember what happened and how this happened.
Well,
all
we are
if you see the
great.
documentary, this documentary
Yes.
on HBO on Max, called The Janes. We were never referred to as the Janes. By the way, the filmmakers just made that up, which is fine. We were Jane, or internally, we referred to ourselves as the service, short for the abortion counseling service. And I always laugh. I say, yes, the service, as if there was only one service. But that's how when we talk to each other, we talk about the service. And Jane was just our code name. So we became known as Jane. Not the Janes, but just as Jane.
Thank you so much. And we will talk again.
Okay.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you both very much for this opportunity. It's always fun.
Laura, you can hit leave and do me a favor. Just keep the tab open just for a couple of minutes because it all uploads.
Okay.
All right. So, shall we reflect?
Oh, what a wealth of historical knowledge and information. I am so it like reinvigorates my desire to stay involved in this kind of work, right? Like what's amazing is how the same spirit she talks about, that excitement about helping women achieve the agency in their lives and find their autonomy again, it still exists today. It's just scaled differently, right? Like talking about digital tools and mutual aid networks, all of those small acts of solidarity ripple out and make a small difference. No one's a hero. I love what she said about courage, because it is. It's just like women have to save themselves. We have to save each other. No one's coming to do it for us.
Well, that's the thing. No one is. And that's really what we're talking about, is the solidarity and the knowledge, because as much as they didn't have the history and they made the history, and as much as they didn't have the tools that we have now, some of the tools we have now can work against us because of, as you said, you do not use an app to track.
There's no privacy anymore. It's all, you have a bigger reach, but now my generation is facing, real privacy concerns.
I mean, and the empathy that they had, ego was not part of it. And that, again, is something that we have to continue thinking about. We're not one up against one another. These are women who came together. They were young. Some were suburban, some were hippies, and they just came together because there was a need.
Well, they had no choice. What else are they going to do?
Well, they didn't have to continue doing it. And
Yeah.
no, they didn't have a choice because they knew it was needed.
Mm-hmm.
As much as they were not heroes, they accomplished, they wanted to do something that supported women, supported something that maybe one of them had gone through, helping a neighbor, and then it just came together.
I can't imagine doing that sort of organizing without texting,
Nope.
the internet, Wi-Fi. It blows my mind trying to think of like how difficult that sort of mutual aid and community organizing is now. It is mind-boggling to me how they accomplished that back then without those tools.
Well, maybe that's what, is the tide turning really means. Looking at how far we've come and asking if we still, as brave as the women who came before. But again, as Laura said, bravery had nothing to do with it. It was a situation that they did something about, and they got together without ego, but a lot of empathy. And so if there's nothing else for closing, that's it for this episode of The Woman's Current, Is the Tide Turning? My thanks, or our thanks, to Laura Kaplan for reminding us what's possible when women stand together and what it takes to do what's right, even when it isn't easy. Thank you, Molly. See you next week. That's it for this episode of The Woman's Current, Is the Tide Turning?
If this conversation sparks something in you, we want to hear from you. What's this week's current moment? Tell us on Instagram @The Women's Current. Share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.
Join us each week as we explore how women are supporting each other and where do we go from here.
Until next time, I'm Molly Wadzik.
And I'm Sylvia Beckerman. Thanks for listening. This has been a Life of Prey production.